Welcome, one and all, to the Stock Up Podcast, your one stop shop for stocking up on the information you need to qualify for the Pro Tour. My name is Alex Midas. I am joined each and every week by my co host, Jacob Negro, where we talk about everything related to competitive magic and how you can qualify for the Pro Tour. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do so is over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. At the moment, we have one tier that's $1 a month, and for that, you get access to all of our exclusive content. For all of our patrons who have supported us thus far, on behalf of Jacob and I would like to thank you very much. And if you'd like to follow us also over on YouTube, that would be much appreciated. Of course, you can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thanks for listening, and please enjoy the rest of the podcast. So we had Pro Tour Secrets of Strixhaven over the weekend, and then we had Pro Tour Secrets of Strixhaven win a box at home.
Yeah.
For us plebs, or for Jacob, who was qualified for the Pro Tour, but took this one off because you had your son.
Yeah.
This month. How'd your event go before we start to talk about the Pro Tour?
I won no boxes, but my win rate was pretty good. I don't have it exactly, but I had one 6-win run that I definitely punted the last game for, a few 5s and 4s, and not that many 0, 1s, or 2s. So I did not end up gems, but I have like all of Strixhaven collected now, and I was only down like 1 entry's worth of gems by the end of it.
Not bad. Yeah, you sent me what you thought were your results from memory, and I think your win percentage off the top of my head was like 75%.
I don't think it was that high when I mathed it out, but maybe I was wrong when I retallied it. But it was in like the 60s, I think. Yeah.
I tallied mine. My win rate was 69%, and I played a lot of entries. So I had a pretty good run in that sense, but I actually only won 1 box.
Yeah.
Which I guess I should be grateful I even won 1. But my wins were not distributed well, I guess I would say.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we're going to do sealed episodes anymore. Notably, though, there is an arena qualifier this weekend that's the same format, and like an arena limited qualifier championship that's also Secrets of Strixhaven, though that might be all draft.
Yeah, I'm not sure about those, whether or not they're all draft, but I know, that we got sealed this weekend.
Best of 1 for the play-in, right? And then the weekend after is the actual qualifier weekend. So yeah,
I enjoy doing sealed episodes, but they're certainly not as popular.
Yeah.
With you all, so we do what the people want. We only have so many topics to cover in a weekly show. So, like, for instance, we really want to cover the Pro Tour today.
Yep.
So we're not going to do.
If we don't get around to an episode, I guess I'll say most sealed pools are very grindy and controlling, and you definitely can get aggro decks, but that's going to be dictated more by your curve than your rares. Like, I know as an example card is Antiquities on the Loose. I don't really care to open this card in sealed, because I'd rather open a bunch of 2-drops in a white aggro deck than open just that card and not have a good aggro deck. And that card I know is one of like the best cards on 17 lands in draft, as an example. So just something to keep in mind. Like, I feel like I've helped some people with sealed pools and repeatedly seen this card in the pool, and it seems like people are working really hard to maybe play that card when I don't think you really need to work that hard to play it.
Okay, I actually can't remember from the top of my head what card that is.
It's the one white make 2 2/2s with flashback for 4 white, and it puts a counter on all your spirits if you flashed it back, and the 2/2 spirits.
Yeah, pretty strong card, but I get what you mean. It's very nice in an aggressive deck, and the 1 white's pretty
exactly.
tricky.
And like a card you really should be looking at that you have is Potioner's Trove, the Manolith that gains life. I think that card's the best common in sealed by a huge margin. It's better than most of the uncommons too. I think, like Stock Up and stuff like that are better than it, but you should probably be playing decks with your Potioner's Troves.
Yeah. It is sort of the thing where it's like kind of the sealed in particular. I think draft's a little bit different, but the sealed in particular is kind of like, soup decks or multiple color decks kind of verse like the white aggro decks. So you pretty much try to build one of those. I had some pools where I felt like I was supposed to build like straight green black and things like that, but I never did well with those. So
Yeah, I had some pools like that too, but I mean the pool that I punted a box for, I would have called blue black control, splashing white and red. And I had like two of the white black rare land even, and a trove and its terramorphic expanse and a blue red tap land. And my pool just had it had two of the two in a black uncommon that kills a creature, and if you gain life, made them lose 3 life. My deck couldn't even gain life, I think. I had three of the three in the black exile target creature spell, and then I had like the Deduce, stock up, Mathemagics. So I was like, I just have to play like these together, like all this good removal. I had more black removal than that even, and all this good card draw. And then I kind of splashed my win conditions. Like I splashed two of the three and a white 3/3 that makes a 1/1 flying. Which also that sounds kind of ridiculous, but I think you really should be looking at things like that as premium and sealed, because a lot of the decks are just piles of removal and spells and stuff like that. So getting any two bodies out of a single card is a big deal. And my deck obviously could win in games with Mathemagics, but dealing 20 damage with two Inklings was kind of a pretty normal thing for my deck. And my deck was really Wincon light, and my opponent had Tragedy Feaster, the ward discard a card 7/6. And I kind of unnecessarily discarded the 4/2 that you can exile from your graveyard, just kind of because I thought it was cute. Um, and I think I needed to keep the 4/2 and just discard a land that was a little bit of an extra land, anyways. And
no,
I think having that 4/2 actually eat a removal spell and one less 1/1 flying eat a removal spell would have won me the game, basically. But instead, I ran out of win cons. I just think um, that it's not weird to be win con light, but you do have to be kind of aware of it. I do think Mathemagics is one of the better cards you could open in the format. And because it doubles as a win con, and you cast it for, I don't know, 6 or 8 mana a lot of the time, and then later in the game can just be lethal. I had an opponent draw 8 against me with Mathemagics, and then I played the whole game around trying to make sure they didn't have a counterspell for mine to kill them.
mm. It's funny with the Mystical Archive in particular. I think there just ends up being a ton of efficient removal for like all the colors.
Yeah.
I find so, and people usually play all the removal. So you end up in a lot of spots where if your deck like doesn't have enough removal, you can you both lose to bombs, but then you also lose to these starts where your opponent curves out with some like good uncommons and then just kills all your blockers, sort of thing. And yeah, if you don't have your own bombs, can be kind of rough. But in terms of building the control decks, you definitely have to make sure you can close out a game, because if you play the mirror match and your control deck is kind of crappy at beating the long game, like if it doesn't have enough card advantage or enough counter spells, these sorts of things, or enough good win conditions, you can kind of just die.
Yeah. And you also have to be kind of cautious of the opposing token making cards too, which is a reason to play them yourself. My 3/3 that makes a 1/1 flying is good against my opponent's 3/3s that make a 1/1 flying. And um, I think Hop to It is randomly like a really annoying card. Both my losses with the deck I went 6/2 with were my opponent had to Hop to It in that game.
Right. So like the all removal control decks don't want to be spending the removal on tokens. So you do need some blockers.
Yeah, it's important to play some creatures, and you just got to find the best ones. And I weirdly had a ton of black white fixing, so I kind of just got to fit these 3/3s that made 1/1 flyers because I felt like they were going to do the best job of that.
I ended up loving the Sloth. I think it's an uncommon, the 3 and a green 4/4 reach.
Yeah, it's a very good card. Yep.
Yeah, for basically that exact reason. It's a super good threat, and then also plays well
Yeah,
defensively.
green is pretty like a commonly played color, I think, in sealed too, just because of the fixing and the fact that these spell heavy decks can splash a lot of really good things too.
Yeah, you don't actually end up with that many dual lands. I'm assuming there's not one per pack.
No, there's an average of like one every 2 packs.
Yeah, that definitely is more
But
what it feels
you
like.
get some rares and you get Potioner's Trove. So those
And then
add
if
up.
you get the uncommon vehicle that searches a land too, that card's really
Yep.
strong.
And then in green, there's the common 1/1 that has little rampant growth attached to it. There's a rare search for 4 basics card, stuff like that.
Yeah. So If y'all have any questions about Sealed, just feel free to put them in the Discord. Me and Jacob like talking about Sealed, so we'll do our best to answer them. So in terms of the episode this week, we are going to be covering the results of the Pro Tour. Jacob, I know you watched pretty closely. Obviously, your team still played and whatnot. Was there anything in particular that surprised you in terms of like deck archetypes and whatnot? I know, certain players can have their standout results, but we, for instance, started the weekend with this snapshot that Izzet was going to be pretty dominant. And in terms of decks submitted, it was. I mean, if you add up all the different blue-red variations, it's close to 50% of the field.
Yeah.
So how do you think it all panned out in your mind?
It kind of panned out exactly as I think I predicted last week. I felt like these Izzet decks were kind of really slowing down and really gunning for each other. And the green landfall deck just really preys on decks slowing down. And the landfall decks just completely overperformed this weekend. 4 copies in the top 8. If you look at the win percentages, it's like the only 2 decks with positive win percentages, basically. Probably because they were popular. It looks like Izzet Spelementals is the only other deck that kind of crossed it. And it's not like Izzet Prowess did horribly, but you can see it was pretty bad into Mono Green and Selesnya Landfall. And then a lot of its sample is a lot of Izzet Mirrors anyways. So it's kind of just brought itself up in Izzet Mirrors. Which makes sense because, if they're gunning to be good in various Izzet Mirrors and being good in Izzet Lessons makes some sense. Very good into apparently the control decks. That also makes sense. I don't really know why you'd bring a control deck to this Pro Tour, to be completely honest with you. It seems bad into both Slickshot, Show Off, and the Landfall decks.
Yeah, especially Talent in my mind is the card that's really puts a lot of pressure on control. And I'm not even sure if you wanted to build your deck to beat the Talent decks. I don't know that you could even do it. Maybe you could make a somewhat positive, slightly positive win rate, but you'd be hurting against the rest of the field.
I guess to be clear about what I said regarding Slickshot is just that, like, you definitely do need to pressure control decks as the Izzet decks. But in my experience, what happens is at some point while pressuring them, you also plot a Show Off. And then if their plan for the otters is like sweepers, or Golgari decks might have Maelstrom Pulse, they just end up tapping out. And the Slickshot just comes down and like does 9 damage to finish them off or something.
Yeah, you're right. That could definitely be true. And Izzet Prowess was the most popular of the decks, as we can see. I mean, overall, the blue-red decks, given that they're half the field and they had a 50% win rate, they didn't do, they did about expected, I would say.
Yeah, but really just no Predators for these landfall decks, which I really still just kind of think all the landfall deck cares about is not getting outraced in the games. And I want to point at like this Izzet Spelementals, it was favored against that as well, even the mono green list. In fact, the landfall, the Selesnya one with a road, which you'd think is better, actually went even against it. Obviously, these are small samples, but it's just like the landfall deck really puts the Spelementals deck to the test to actually do the kind of Thunderflock thing. And then on top of that, I think the post-board games could be tricky for Spelementals because these landfall decks all sideboard like 4 Mossbarn Hydras for each other. But that's an elemental. It's a very lethal elemental. So if you don't have that covered and your only plan is a Thunderflock, you'll still lose to it.
Yeah. I mean, landfall really is posing the question of this format now of whether or not people can answer it, I would say, because like you said, it's very difficult to kind of control the landfall deck or beat it with a slower deck. And even, the prowess decks, you could see here, Selesnya Landfall, only went 50% against it. Hang on, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Oh no, it went 60. That's the Spelementals. So yeah. Landfall in general just went super well against even the prowess version. And isn't the prowess version like the more aggressive, takes a more aggressive stance against
this data's not really split correctly because 99 players registered what was called Izzet Prowess, and only 18 of them registered Elusive Otter, and that's all lumped together here. So they're certainly not all as aggressive as possible. As far as I can tell, if they just had like Storm Chaser's Talent and Boomerang Basics and Slickshot Show Off in their deck, they're in this list.
Okay.
Maybe even, I think some didn't even have Show Offs.
Okay. So we don't know for sure, at least from this data set, that the elusive auto decks did poorly against landfall.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. We can look at some specific results later.
Yeah,
I have some deck lists pointed out, including Shota Yasuoka did play Elusive Otter. So we can see maybe on Melee what matchups he played and if he won or lost.
sure. Okay. Yeah, well, you definitely called it then. We could go ahead and look at what decks made top 8.
Yeah, so 4 landfall decks, 2 Selesnya in the finals. Great showing from Cosmos. Also, cool finals. I have not watched the finals yet. I do know Nathan won already, not spoilers to me, but I do plan on still recording kind of a review of the finals, kind of a what's the play over and over throughout the whole thing. Should be in the next week. But yeah, it was kind of epic to have, Christopher Larson just won the last Pro Tour and he had a chance to go back to back. But either way, whoever won this Pro Tour was going to be a 2-time Pro Tour champion, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty insane. And all off
But
the back
getting
of this.
first and then second in back to back Pro Tours is, really close to the same feat that has only been accomplished by Kai, I believe.
Oh wow, yeah, it's pretty crazy if he would have done that. Either way, it's funny because like at the end of the day, it's just one match for
Yeah.
him to have not have
Yeah,
done that. So it's
exactly.
like he got 95% of the way there, But so yeah, the decks that took these two to the finals. I mean, green white landfall, basically landfall with the innovation of Erode is the big
Yeah,
thing.
there's a few other things going on here. They opted out of the Esper Origins type stuff, and I know I'm kind of a big fan of Ice Still Explorer, and I've played a lot with Explorer and no Esper Origins. But they just went lower on Ice Still Explorer, kind of in favor of, I guess, their cut for Lumbering World Wagons, which the World Wagon is a much more aggressive card. It still helps you trigger landfall, which is kind of what Ice Still Explorer does. Obviously, Ice Still gives you this unlimited landfall supply, kind of. But at least when you have a wagon instead of an Ice Still Explorer, you'll still get like an extra landfall trigger that turn, and it's really lethal with the Harmonizer. If you just play a turn 3 World Wagon, then warping the Harmonizer, crewing, playing a land, and searching a land is a lethal attack. So
Yeah, that makes sense. So lowering the curve overall, playing Erode as their interaction. They never really played Get Lost before, right? So this is specifically them saying, okay, I like that Erode is 1 mana, and
yeah,
I'm
and
willing
just
to
showing your
splash for
own
that.
things to get a land matters for a landfall trigger. You can kill your own Earthbent land even to get 2 landfall triggers. So
Yeah, that's a nice interaction.
it's pretty
Definitely a fallback.
synergistic. Um, and then another white card, Diadrine. That's kind of cool. It's, if you haven't played with this before, notably, the X is kind of fake because the green and the white are kind of counting towards the X as well. So it's like a 2 mana 2/3 trample at its smallest, which is nice to fit in like another cheap card when you're kind of going more aggressive, anyways. And this ability is kind of tricky in this deck because it says whenever you attack, you can remove a +1/+1 counter from each of 2 creatures you control. If you do, draw a card and create a 2/2 colorless robot thing. The most notable thing is if you have a 1/1 Earthbent thing for a Badgermal Cub, you can remove that counter, and the Earthbent line will come back. So it's another way to kind of sneak in some landfall triggers.
Oh, I didn't think of that. That's very nice.
Yeah.
I played with this card a bit when it came out. I do think it's a pretty strong card.
Yeah, it makes sense. And when you already have counters flowing in your deck, it's nice that even if you don't do the landfall trick, the fact that you could play this and get the card and a robot on the same turn means you kind of won't mind what happens to it after that.
Right. And it's legendary, so 2 makes sense as a number that they would play, but it looked pretty good on coverage the few times that I got to see it in action.
Yeah.
Is there like a big cost to adding splashing white in this deck?
Yeah, so I mean, if you compare these mana bases to the mono green ones, first of all, they're like one untapped green source short compared to other lists. I noticed. Obviously, Hushwood Verge is not that costly at all. Temple Garden costs some life. If you ran out of basics, that could be a big deal. Though with only 2 Ice Tills, Ice Till is really the card that makes you run out of basics. And then the other issue with Hushwood Verge and Temple Garden is that when you play them, your bossing saves might still be tapped. That's an issue I've run into. I've done some more minor white splashes in these decks where, maybe I have 1 Plains and 4 Hushwood Verge and that's it. And yeah, I would say they have, you know, maybe one less fetch land than the other decks too, but they have one less lands than most of the other lists generally do anyways. They have bushwhacks instead. I saw a few lists had bushwhack. That makes some sense. Even though I wouldn't call it early interaction, it's still cheap interaction on a deck that can kind of get clunky in the mid game. So being able to like squeeze it in on, turn 3 or 4 to fight something can be a big deal for 1 mana.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So definitely a cost to play their roads, but not too bad. I guess honestly, my worry would maybe just be not enough basics, but cutting ice tail is.
Yeah,
I mean, that's probably part
they're
of the
just
equation.
they kind of really leaned into almost being a Might Form Harmonizer deck and not really an Ice Till deck.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of been the direction of the deck, I would say.
Yeah,
People in the past cut their landfall that makes 3-4 reaches and whatnot already.
Yeah, that being said, those two cards are just kind of a combo together with Escape Tunnel, especially, and you see a lot of lists will have 4 of each and 4 Escape Tunnel for that reason. Notably, if just like on curve you like play your land, play Ice Till, and play Escape Tunnel from your graveyard, and then don't crack it on the next turn, if your opponent just say was playing landfall and they played a bunch of blockers and didn't kill you, you can sack the Escape Tunnel to make your Ice Till unblockable, put a Harmonizer into play, and play the Escape Tunnel 4 times and attack them for 32 unblockable. So, it's kind of deceptive if you haven't played with or against the Landfall deck, but that combo happens all the time, I'd say, in Landfall to end the game. Just play an Ice Till, play an Escape Tunnel, and your opponent doesn't have an answer and they die.
Oh yeah, it's super powerful. Honestly, it's one of the reasons this deck is so strong. So it can kill you out of nowhere if you tap out. Might as well look at the deck by Stefan. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he got 8th.
I think it's
place.
A lot of people add an L to it. Stefan's a friend of mine. I talk to him all the time.
Oh, okay,
Glad
cool.
to see him get a PT top 8. His only other, I think they said he had like a handful of top finishes. That's because he's qualified and won those 8-person mocks events. He's won one of them and qualified for another one of them. So I think that's what that's counting as top 8s. I don't believe he actually has like PT top 8s before this. So it's cool to
Sure.
see.
Okay, cool. I mean, those are nice results too, right?
Yeah, winning one's obviously great.
So yeah,
Magic Online, he's Mental Misstep. You've probably come across.
Oh yeah,
a lot,
I bet the Magic Online players know him quite well. So this deck looks, more standard, like you're saying. It's got the Esper Origins and the Ice Hill Explorers. I don't know what felled him in the top 8 ultimately, but do you have any sense of
what... He lost to Selesnya, I think, but maybe I'm mistaken. Anyways, yeah, this is pretty similar to the landfall list my team registered, except they, instead of these 1-drops and Edge Rovers and Dragon Sniper, had the 4th Harmonizer and 2 Sapling Nursery, and they didn't have this Cavern of Souls. So it's kind of interesting, I was talking about that with my team, to come to the conclusion, to come to a lot of the same conclusions we had, except then to say, I just want more 1-drops and I don't want Sapling Nursery, because that's like one of the most drastic changes you could make,
It certainly is. Do you have a sense of who's right?
I could see this list being pretty good. It seems a little scared of Prowess still. I mean, I'm sure it's better against Prowess, and Prowess was really popular. I think our team's landfall list was favored against Prowess, but that's not an excuse to not go further, right? And this list, I think, is better against Prowess than our list was, but I think they're both favored.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when I see 1-mana reach creatures, it's pretty narrowly focused on basically Slick Shot Show Off.
Yeah, certainly, and it makes
you could trade for 1/1s, trade for otters, that sort of thing.
The main deck Melt Striders Resolves a little more consistent. If I had to pick a landfall list, maybe it would be closer to this. I would probably cut one of these 1-drops for the 4th Harmonizer still, but it's a little that one's kind of crazy to me to come to the conclusion to only play 3, to be honest. But I like the idea of Edge Rover. I don't care much for the Dragon Sniper. I like that the Edge Rover is kind of just like another cheap play that works out pretty defensively or aggressively, whereas the Dragon Sniper I'm kind of worried is purely defensive.
Mm-hmm. What's the trade-off here between this and the white deck? I mean, obviously you get the cards, right? You get a road in the white deck, but is that...
Yeah, I mean, obviously
good in your
the splash in the white deck is not free. And then Esper Origins is really like the big thing here. I guess a really nice part about Esper Origins is I think people were really playing a lot of Get Out in these Izzet decks, which hits pretty much your whole deck except for Esper Origins. But having things that aren't hit by counter magic, I guess is the way to describe it, is a really big deal against counter magic. You know, like if your opponent just sees the Esper Origins in your graveyard and like wants to pass with Get Out, it's really tough for them to do that to begin with. And if they do it and you just cast the Esper Origins, you might blank their whole turn.
Yeah. I mean, that totally makes sense. I guess in my mind, I'm kind of thinking the road thing must sort of be a hedge for the like other green decks, right? That's like the biggest play you could make.
Yeah, it's pretty good against Eddie Merc Crab too. So maybe it's a big deal there too.
Yeah, I'm sure that was a part of the calculation.
Obviously, Meltstrider's Resolve is not the strongest card. Notably, it's a strong card with Esper Origins, which is also kind of where I like the Edge Rovers. Cheap, like kind of high impact permanents to hit off Esper Origins is a pretty big deal in this deck. It's not that weird to, maybe flash it back and have one spare mana. The fight on your 4/4 is obviously a big deal, but I could see a 2/2 reach also being a big deal when, maybe you just need to not die to Slickshot Show Off. People also mentioned when you do cast Meltstrider's Resolve on Edge Rover, the 2/4 reach is especially annoying for Slickshot Show Off.
Yeah, even if you just use it to kill an auto, right? Then you have 2/4 reach. It's pretty annoying for them. Okay. Yeah, so good call. The landfall did so well. A lot of people, came prepared in theory for landfall, but a lot of them seemed pretty hardline focused into beating Izzet, and then landfall sort of won the day.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to argue with the results that Selesnya was maybe just better than Mono Green, but Mono Green still exceptional. We'll have to see, the format moving forward is now going to be a bit more potent towards landfall, so we can probably talk about that at the end, but maybe that changes whether Mono Green or Selesnya is better.
Yeah, totally. I think we could certainly talk about like where we see the format going as a whole towards the end, and right now we might as well get into some of these more decks here. In fourth place, we do have Izzet Lessons. So in terms of all the Izzet decks, this one, I mean, has to be one of the most underrated ones, mostly because it didn't get any new cards per se. I mean, some people play, like an Emeritus of Ideation or whatever, or two in the sideboard, I noticed. But for the most part, people were settled on the old lists. The person who did the best here, this Ri Zhang, had kind of an innovation in consult the star charts. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so this is a player I've talked about a lot on our podcast as well. Just usually I call them CFT Sock.
Oh, okay.
This is them as well. So big combo player, and like played top 8 Pro Tour Outlaws with Slogurk. But yeah, the joke with Ray is that they always take every deck and add 2 or 3 divinations to them. So seeing Consult here is not surprising. It looked really good. And comically, they didn't kick it much when it looked really good. It just seemed like they were just looking at their top 7 cards for like another monument when they needed to close the game for 1 mana or stuff like that.
Yeah, so Ray is how you pronounce it then?
Yeah, we had this conversation, I guess, short side. They changed their name spelling recently on coverage from REI to RUI. It's Chinese, obviously, and it was just a matter that they believed this is more accurate to how it should be translated, even though it is not as easy to understand.
English speakers.
Yeah, but they decided they cared less about that and should just have it be more accurate. So
sure. Okay, so Ray, they were doing really well on day 1. And so they're on coverage. I saw them, and as soon as I saw the consults, I immediately thought it was a really good idea, and I was just like, why didn't I ever think of that? Because I've played this deck before, and I've wanted to cut the stupid Storm Chaser Talents for something, and consults fits really nicely. And again, you do kick it some of the time, I imagine, but yeah, the 2 mana mode in particular is really good here because part of the some of the games you lose is just because you never find a monument or you never find
enough
accumulate wisdom.
Yeah. No, and also, it's probably a big deal. It probably is, when you play against a lot of landfall, not getting kicked that much and stuff like that. But when you do pair into one of the control decks, it's probably a huge deal to have that and be able to kick it.
Right.
It's just a really threatening thing to do on your opponent's end step.
Yeah, I'm looking.
And also,
back
Spell
really
Snare is
quick.
at a huge decline.
That's true, and Spell Snare's really good against this deck.
Yeah.
So overall, Is It Lessons did 49%, so pretty, average, maybe a little lower than average because it was played less than the other Is It decks. So you'd expect it to maybe do a little bit better, but
this might have been the only list with Consult, though, to be fair. So
that's true. I know another player who did quite well with Lessons, went 8-2, I believe.
Nice.
And they had 4 Storm Chasers talents. So
yes, a lot of options with Lessons still, obviously. Also, I mean, I'm not really much of a Lessons expert anymore, but most people I talk to about Lessons will tell you to always play 4 abandoned attachments. So to play 2 is, pretty unique.
yeah, I've always liked 4, but again, once you're introducing Consult to start charts, I could
You have
see
something, that kind of does something similar. Though
might
it is
change
weird
the
because you don't
equation.
really want to Consult on turn 2.
Yeah,
It definitely looked like it was a late game card. Even if they weren't kicking it much, it was still kind of designed to be like Demonic Tutor like.
yeah. Maybe you're supposed to play 3 or 4 abandoned attachments still, and then maybe you only play 2 Consults or something. Because you do pay a cost for having non-Lessons cards in your deck for sure.
Yeah. And then, neither of these lists have the card Flashback. I only point that out because my team that played Lessons had some flashbacks in their deck, kind of as the filler cards. They played the heavy quench, 3 steps ahead version of Lessons without Storm Chaser's talent, but had some flashbacks.
Do you know how many? They have 2?
They had 2 or 3, I think, between their lists, yeah.
Oh, 2 or 3. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Which doesn't help you find the first abandon, but can be the second abandon, accumulate.
I will say Flashback has disappointed a little bit, but Is It Lessons might be the best home for it.
Yeah, the theory from my team is basically that after they built their deck with quenches and 3 steps ahead, that the best possible thing they could play is more copies of the cards they already play.
Right. Okay. It kind of makes sense. I will say people board in a lot of graveyard hate against you, so you probably have to board them out a lot, which...
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the description they had of Lessons, I kind of agree with, is that game 1, you're like Dredge, like old modern Dredge almost. I think the Lessons game 1 matchups across the board are really good.
Yeah.
Because people don't really have cards main deck for Artist Talent and Monument or Graveyard Hate. But obviously all those things get introduced post board, and you kind of have to just turn into a crappy blue-red control deck in almost every matchup. But, that's a thing that can get across the finish line. And, it's not like the worst scenario for being a post board, blue-red control deck either.
Yeah, for sure. It doesn't seem like, at least from this tournament, that it performs too well against Landfall, so that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it all depends. I mean, turn 1 Grand is going to really make or break those types of matchups. It's hard to know as a Landfall player. They have these removal spells main nowadays, but like, how many do you want for just 4 Grands? Because they're totally dead when their opponent doesn't have it. And sometimes on turn 5, they play Grand and they cast 4 spells and stuff like that, even when you could erode it or something in response. Certainly,
I will say the Storm Chasers talent, like, I don't have everyone's lists in front of me, but if most people had Storm Chasers talents in their Lessons decks, I could imagine that being the direction you absolutely do not want to go against Landfall, whereas Ray, they're more controlling and consults and some more counter spells makes a lot more sense. And maybe that's why they were successful in this tournament where some other players weren't.
Yeah, consults finding, your proactive cards, I think, matter a lot too. I don't know. That's, in my opinion, the scariest part about Lessons, but they can't really, there's not like more copies of cards they can play, but when you're playing Lessons against Landfall and you like win the die roll or just on the play even game, post board, I really think you just want to see Grand and the talent and the Monument more than you care about the Lessons.
Probably. I would think Combustion Technique might matter a lot, being able to find 1 or 2 of those and keep.
Yeah, but you kind of find all those if you assemble your engine first, and I just think like it's a lot worse to just be, playing abandons and quenches and combustion techniques and not, even if you cast some accumulates, you're not really like pressuring them, and that's a huge deal versus the Landfall deck, especially because that's how you lose to Bossing Say and stuff like that.
Right. The last outlier in the top 8 specifically was this Azorius Tempo deck. And this is a deck we've seen before. It looks like they've added Sky Coach Conductor. Do you know anything about this player or this deck?
Yeah, Zevin, kind of, I want to say new to the PT, not brand new. They top 8'd their first Pro Tour, which was Aether Drift, and have been on since. And they also top 8'd a regional to get here, and they play a lot of their own decks. If you remember from Pro Tour Aether Drift top 8, the deck they played was the black-green Up the Beanstalk deck. And this finish is pretty cool because Zevin went 9-1 at the last Pro Tour with this deck, basically, and didn't top 8.
Okay.
So kind of on a major tear with this
kidding.
archetype. Kind of the joke here is it's a main deck High Noon deck, and you use Avatar's Wrath, Aang, Swift Savior, and Aven Interrupter to like really double down on how good High Noon is, because you airbend and make them, you put these spells into exile and these cards aren't card advantage, but when they can only deploy one spell a turn, then it just becomes a real mess. When you airbend their one, when you have the High Noon in play and they try to cast a spell, then Aang just gets rid of the spell for that turn, and if they want to recast it, they can't double it up with anything else, so the airbend only being 2 mana or the plot only being 2 mana are effectively 10 mana or whatever. It's their whole turn. And then Voice of Victory also kind of plays into the annoyance of High Noon, because your opponent can't cast spells on your turn, and one of the best things to do against High Noon is cast a spell on each player's turn.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this deck plays kind of like a prison deck, especially if they have Voice and High Noon down. I mean, what do you even do?
Yeah. Zevin, I think, said they prefer the deck isn't called Azorius Tempo, and he said, I want to say he said you could call it Azorius High Noon, but Azorius Prison is also fine.
There you go. Yeah, it is definitely a deck that's built around High Noon. I think that's fair.
Yeah, and it's worth noting just with High Noon in general, because sometimes you see this card out of control decks, but it does have this red mode attached to it, and this deck has 4 Starting Town and 2 Multiversal Passage, and I think it's totally common to end the game with the 5 damage from High Noon. So it's not completely dead in multiples necessarily, and it's not like completely irrelevant to deal that 5 damage either.
No, yeah, and their deck is built around utilizing it. They have all the instant stuff. They have some abandoned air temples. They have Aang, which they can spend their mana on, while you're locked out, and they have more things to do in that sense.
Yeah, and Conductor seems like a great add to this deck.
Yeah, totally. Just being able to have this sitting in play with the 1 blue mana up for the all aboard can be really strong, because if you have an Interrupter or an Aang in play, you can blink those.
Yeah, it's a little weird with High Noon, and we saw on camera Zevin do this a few times where like maybe he had High Noon down, Aang's one of his opponent's spells, and then next turn just main phase is the Sky Coach Conductor so that he can have the flicker up on his opponent's turn.
Right, sure.
That's
not the worst play.
Yeah, when you get to do all that, your opponent is kind of screwed, so it's kind of fine.
Yeah, totally.
But keep in mind, if you play this deck, that if you have High Noon in play, you can't play the Conductor and the spell in the same turn.
Mm-hmm. In the top 8, the coverage while I was watching, they kept mentioning that this deck's really hard to play against, and I could agree. Do you have any tips for people, maybe if they haven't played against this deck?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've played against this deck a lot on ladder. It's probably really hard to play too, so my ladder opponents are probably not playing great. I mean, I think it's really important, having answers for the creatures can be a big deal. Do keep in mind that even if you're a deck you don't think High Noon would be very good against, maybe Zevin doesn't have 4 in his deck in every matchup after boards, but I doubt he goes to 0 either. I know he had some sideboard guides and stuff, and I wouldn't be surprised if you looked in there to see just stuff like -2 High Noon against landfall or something like that.
Yeah, I would say as at a baseline, it's actually quite important to keep the creatures off the battlefield, because even though none of them have a lot of power, the way the deck operates is if it can stick even one creature, it can really sort of lock you out. So killing the creatures is important, and trying to, if they don't have High Noon down, I mean, maybe killing High Noon should be a priority too if you're able to play to that.
Yeah, you probably should put your disenchant in as landfall or stuff like that. I mean, it helps when they're if you have paw patch formation, that's obviously kind of premium here because it also kills flyers.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a nice one to include in your green sideboards maybe going forward.
Yeah.
If this deck becomes popular. And yeah, maximizing which, playing your spell, both a spell on your turn and your opponent's rather than just one big one on your turn. Although sometimes you may not even want to play a spell on your turn just because you don't want to give them the flash creature, if they just get to flash in and
yeah, keep that in mind in mid-game scenarios. This more so when you have removal, I think this maybe came up in the top 8 match against Lessons. Just like, yeah, sometimes you don't want to cast a spell because you want to use their High Noon against them because they don't have any pressure yet. And you casting a spell allows them to play something and pressure you. Whereas if you just like hold up Combustion Technique, then if they cast something on your end step, you can technique it and they can't do anything about it. Also, like when playing against High Noon, you can maybe consider, if you have powerful instants, don't just fire them off on your opponent's end step because you play this waiting game a lot where it's like, well, if they play a Voice of Victory, I could respond with my kicked Consult the Star Charts and they can't do anything about it or stuff like that. That's maybe not even a great example because card draw into this deck is not amazing because, High Noon kind of limits the speed at which you can play your cards, and therefore being up a lot of cards is not necessarily a huge advantage against this deck. But something like an Eddie Merc Crab might be a better example where, like, don't just maybe run it out there because, you can guarantee resolve it if your opponent has already cast a spell.
Right. Yeah, especially if they don't already have a threat in play. You're not under pressure. You're not like, you don't have to gamble that they don't have another counterspell creature in their hand. You can just wait until you develop maybe some more lands, or maybe you draw the right kind of instance, that sort of thing. So interesting deck. I have played against it a lot on ladder too. I don't know how good it is overall, but I could definitely see, an excellent player who knows it really well doing well, because it is kind of hard to play against. People aren't going to be super prepared for it in most tournaments, I don't think.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's most of the top 8.
Well, I think you missed one.
Okay.
Matt Nass with Selesnya
Yeah, I forgot. I just saw the green and white symbols and forgot that this deck was actually quite a bit different. So this is actually really important. Matt Nass did excellent this whole tournament. And tell me about his deck. Why is it different than the other green white decks?
Yeah, so I mean, this is closer to the Cub decks we know, but it's actually a little different because he doesn't have Nature's Rhythm and Spider Manifestation in his main deck. He's actually sideboarding them alongside Crater Hoof, which is kind of the classic really fast thing to do, which mattered a lot when you're playing these Cub mirrors. I guess, I don't really call Landfall a Cub deck, even though it has Cub. Cub is maybe literally the worst card in that deck. I don't think they should cut it by any means, but it's kind of just like a filler 2-drop thing that happens to be synergistic and ramp them. Whereas it's kind of the key component of these decks. This deck is actually kind of a true Selesnya Ouroboros deck because it kind of plays things like Sage of the Skies and goes wide with Paw Patch Recruit as well, and actually plays 4.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like a total reversal. So in the past, the Nature's Rhythms decks, first of all, they were mostly blue-green, but a lot of them did toy around with like Bant colors and whatnot so they could have the bright glass gear Hulk. But really their main plan was like, okay, I'm going to Nature's Rhythm you and Crater Hoof Behemoth game 1 when you're not prepared. And then when you bring in a ton of action, then I'll bring in, my Sorox and my normal creatures, and I'll try to just cobble together a win with a green creature beatdown. This is like the opposite, where he's starting game 1 with green white creature beatdown. He's even got Sage of the Skies to play well against Izzet, presumably. And then he's like, well, I'll still sideboard the Rhythms and the Crater Hoof and the Spider-Man Manifestation. So pretty interesting deck.
Yeah, and 4 main deck Keen-Eyed Curator, also kind of a huge nod, I think, to the Izzet decks.
Keen-Eyed Curator, yeah, Sage, and Bright Glass Gear Hulk too, right? Mostly what you get is you can get more creatures, but I think a lot of the time you just go get 2 Seam Reps or a Seam Rep and a Maelstrom Resolve, and you just play this mid-range game where you lock your opponent down and eventually kill them with a big 4/4 or stick an Herboroid.
Yeah, and last week my prediction for what was going to win the tournament was a kind of a more classic Cub deck, which this is not actually really a classic Cub deck, but it's the closest thing we have to it. And a little disappointed. I mean, Matt knows this already, but he did, I think, punt his top 4 match and missed lethal in game 2.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was 7-1 going into day 2, and I saw he's 3-0 his draft, and I was messaging you because it really seemed like he was going to kind of fulfill the exact prophecy I laid out going into the event. And his deck seemed, I think this main deck configuration is maybe not as strong against landfall as Cub usually is. It's probably pretty close to just like a very play draw matchup looking at it, but post board siding into the faster deck, I think, is a big deal. And then obviously he still has some fast things, and what ended up happening against Nathan is in game 2 he missed lethal, which would have been a game he could have stole on the draw, And in game 5, he mulled the 5 and didn't really get there, even though he was on the play.
Right. And just one win would have, in theory, got him there. So yeah, it's almost like Nathan's muse was protecting him or something. Gotten Matt's head.
Yeah, another cool thing, the win-in he had against Max, who still made top 8 on Spelementals, he kind of just like 2 of the games soloed the game with Keen-Eyed Curator. It was pretty funny. Just got one down on turn 2, or maybe he had to wait a turn to try to sneakily resolve it through counter magic like Spell Snare. But it's just kind of, Max didn't have an answer and just kept him off the graveyard, and he could never get Sunderflocked. And it was not the fastest of games, but he still just kind of crossed the finish line with random Mana Dorks and Keen-Eyed Curator.
Yeah, that is a pretty problematic card for them, right? Even the fact that it's 3 toughness is pretty tough. They don't play a ton of removal that just kills it outright, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, for the last Pro Tour, when we played Spelementals and kind of invented it, the Curators were such an issue that even though we thought our Cup matchup was great, we were worried about maybe Cup decks, main decking a lot of copies of Curator, and that's why we had Glacial Dragon Hunt.
Okay, yeah. And I think you had snares and sears and whatnot too. And I know that
we had 3 snare almost the whole time, but the issue is just, sometimes you have to tap out. And
sure,
like, if you played your Winter Night Stories and they just responded with a Keen-Eyed and exile 3 cards from your graveyard, you could get locked out of the game in kind of the same way Max did.
Yeah, but my point there was just that I think those numbers from the lists I've seen have been on the downturn a little bit because I've been playing.
Yeah, there's now the Joke, which does 3 for 1 mana, which helps, and I think Max had a couple. But yeah, and we saw one of the games he like dug and eventually sound broadside barrage to answer it, and when he broadside barrage the Curator, he just was exactly dead to 8 damage from Ouroborite or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like you need it to solo the game. You just need it to disrupt them enough for the rest.
Yeah,
of your
I guess
creatures
we can talk about Max's list too. I mean, it's not traditional Izzet prowess.
Sure.
So we see, thinking of what I know of Spelementals, there's now the introduction of 4 Prismari Charms. Actually, there's no traumatic critiques here. So that's an interesting conclusion. I guess the burn out your opponent plan of that card is certainly a little unnecessary in this format because, the games are mostly prowess and landfall matchups. Where your creature package probably gets the job done, and Prismari Charm does do a pretty reliable job of like helping you flee your graveyard. If you mill 2 spells on the Surveil, you can even turn 3 a crab if you had a 1-drop.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the Surveil 2 draw rate, like if you're going to be casting Critique a lot on turn 2, the Surveil 2 draws a little better. I still like Critique in theory in this deck, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, and what I think is happening is that if you do include critiques in your list, and my team I think was guilty of this, is that it's really impacting your 1-drop count. Like I think a lot of my team's Spelementals list and testing might have looked a lot like this, but they just like didn't have these impractical jokes or something, and instead had critiques.
They still had 4 charm.
Yeah, though they pretty much always had 4 charm.
Okay.
I guess the Winter Night Stories and Flow State split here is actually 3-3. My team was kind of splitting some Flow States and Winter Night Stories, but did not get to 6 total copies ever. So that's also kind of an increase in 2-for-1s anyways.
Yeah, what do you think about Flow State in this deck? I feel like it's definitely worse here than it is in Prowess.
Yeah, I mean, there's some sorceries included here. We even see Heroes Hangout over a land, which is kind of Heroes Hangout's like the red sleight of hands in a sense. But you have to, only till your next turn to cast the card you picked, which is kind of a really awkward card in my opinion when you play Spell Snares and Hearth, these elementals that might not even work. But I mean, it makes sense to increase more. It's the next cantrip you can play, and it's a sorcery. Also, Flow State, obviously you don't want to play in the graveyard hate, but it's not like a dead card.
Yeah, I guess. My thought exactly was that this deck is particularly vulnerable to graveyard hate, more so than even Prowess. But I do agree that Flow State still works just fine. You still get a card and whatnot.
Also, some interesting tech in the sideboard is Hexing Squelcher.
Okay, tell me about that one. What do you think?
I mean, people are really looking at using counter magic to answer your elementals, I think, and they don't really want to have Burst Lightning in their deck. So this is pretty good there. It was also pointed out to me that when you have this, Ready Merc Crab's pretty good against your deck, but when this is in play and they want to tap your guys with Crab, they would need to pay 4 life. So that's kind of a big deal too, because kind of the whole nice thing about Eddie Merc Crab is it's a huge life swing, and this kind of mitigates that. So that makes a lot of sense. It's really, even in open deck lists, it's still just like, what are you going to do? You know, like you could watch me sideboard these in face up, and how many Burst Lightnings are you going to leave in your deck?
There's 2 of them, yeah, and then 2 Hydro-Man. It's kind of funny because Hydro-Man also fills a somewhat, obviously it's a little different, but it plays a somewhat similar slot, but it's legendary, so you can only have 2. So that's why you all only had 2, but now you have some Squelchers too.
Yeah, Hydro Man's also a little interesting in that it's kind of hard to shock sometimes because Opt or now even Prismari Charm can save it. So leaving in Burst Lightning with the idea that you're going to hit Hydro Man is a little ambitious.
Agreed. Got some Rals here in the sideboard as their other juke for Rest in Peace and whatnot, I guess. Yeah. What do you think about this deck's position overall?
Yeah, I mean, from the data, you know, I'm pretty skeptical of its landfall matchup.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of skeptical of the prowess list, but some of the prowess lists seemed like they weren't moving in on 4 crabs. I do think the scariest part, you know, from the prowess matchup is if they play 4 crabs, but that just, in my opinion, leads to them having a deck that's kind of even against you. So it's not like a disaster, but it kind of, in my mind, and looking at what my team thought, and I kind of agreed with, was kind of like, what's the point of playing this deck? You know, you can think Sunderflock's really well positioned, but I'm a little skeptical because of the Mossborn Hydras and all the landfall lists.
Yeah, Sunderflock was really mostly a hammer against the actual Cub decks, right? Not just, you know, landfall.
Yeah, and it's pretty normal for landfall, as an example, to board out all their Cubs against this deck. So you're not even like getting them as much on the landfall little creatures. Obviously, they still earthbend other lands, and that's useful there, but they're definitely kind of mitigating a lot of the power of Sunderflock by boarding out Cub.
Yeah, and they actually have a plan, whereas the others didn't. Okay.
And kind of the same issue, like, I think on top of that, the landfall deck's going to board in a mix of Keen-Eyed Curators and Soul Guide Lanterns.
This deck is relatively linear, but are there moves you can make? Like, are there changes you can make to this deck to make it better in the landfall matchup? Since that's probably going to be pretty popular going forward.
Honestly, I think this is one of the more optimal lists you could play against landfall. So I'm sure that helped Max make top 8. You know, Max was on Team Handshake, which a lot of them played landfall, so I'm sure he was very aware of how that matchup played out.
Mm-hmm. Do you like all these spell snares? It seems like maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. Maybe a little less so with the green-white deck now. This was a weird thing. I think I pointed out on the podcast too, but I pointed out to my team that when, you know, old spell elementals, you could play 3 or 4 spell snares because every creature that could like, or every spell that could like kill a hearth elemental or a crab at instant speed just cost 2 mana. But if a premier deck is playing 1 mana answers to these cards, it's kind of a big deal because, you know, when you play Spell Snare, I think a lot of people point at like the quantity of 2-drops in their opponent's deck to justify playing so many copies, but I think that was a little inaccurate before Spelementals because it was just like, no, like my opponent has 4 Doomblades in their deck and I'm just going to engineer a spot where I play Crab with Spell Snare up and I'm just going to like, they're just always going to have the 2-drop at that stage of the game and I'm always going to have the Spell Snare. So the quantity didn't really matter because you had so much control over when they actually cast these spells. But Erode, I think, is a big deal against this deck.
Okay. I mean, you could go back to the Spider Reflex.
Spider Sense? Yeah, I mean...
Spider Sense.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the nice part about Spell Snare is that, you know, you're just trying to get your spells in your graveyard as fast as possible. And Spider Sense is really only a card that works after you do your thing.
Yeah, for sure. Spell Snare is always still going to nab a Cub or whatever deck your opponent plays. Surely they have some 2-mana cards usually.
Yeah. Get Out's pretty good in this deck. You could definitely play a version that has some main deck Get Outs. This list has 1, but that's a pretty reasonable kind of hedge towards landfall and other crabs, stuff like that.
Makes sense. Okay, now I think we covered the top 8.
Yeah.
You sent me a list of some interesting decks to cover. Real quick, though, I can't help but notice this Dimir Excruciator deck that actually had the best constructed record before top 8.
We could look at that.
Look at it real quick. So we'll move over to, for those of you watching, mostly Melee, because it's a little nicer looking at the decks. But
wow.
What's going on with this deck?
This is a very creature-heavy version with the Overlords, and Gearhulks. I'm kind of used to the Emeritus in this deck now. That's something I just kind of expect out of this deck.
Is
You know,
Ancestral Recall targeting your opponent like the big reason?
yeah, it's good with Spider-Man too.
That's a
You
good
know, if
point.
you discard the stories, you might be able to get the discount. But yeah, it fulfills the condition to win with Excruciator, which is you have to break the deck dynamic by 3 or more cards, which Restless Reef obviously does, but Ancestral Recall also does. In order to win the race against your own demon, you have to get your opponent 3 cards deeper into their library. So that still works, and it's still a big value creature, which is pretty cool. This list still has a Quantum Riddler in the sideboard, but in my mind, it's like the Excruciator lists were kind of sideboarding Riddlers before, anyways, and I think the main deck, maybe 2 Emeritus or whatever, this list has 3, is kind of doing a similar thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Guess it works with your Winter Night stories and whatnot too. I mean, yeah, it makes a lot of sense in this deck. This deck is really popular on ladder, and I know I think it might be a pretty popular deck for people to make it locals and whatnot too. So
Yeah, I've played a lot of Landfall against this archetype, and all I'll say is they have one card that matters, and it's Doomsday Excruciator. It's really hard to lose when that card's not involved, I feel like. Even Devious Cover Up, I know they can sometimes hit all your forests, but if you can avoid them hitting all your forests, that card's not that scary either.
yeah. 9-1 at this event. I mean, they had to have done pretty well against Landfall, but not necessarily, I suppose. I would be worried
when you
against
scroll
the
down, does it
matchup.
do you see his matchup? Yeah, look.
Okay.
We can see Azorius Momo, Jeskai Control, Landfall, Golgari Midrange, Landfall, Azorius Momo, Is It Prowess, and then lost to Jeskai Control. So,
Okay.
yeah.
It's pretty good. I imagine Momo is probably one of your best matchups.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
One of my teammates on Momo, which we'll get to that list at the end.
Mm-hmm. They only played against one Prowess. I would think Prowess would actually be the struggle with this deck. More
Yeah,
so
me
than
too. Did this
Landfall.
list have Cavern of Souls? Cavern's really...
It did.
Yeah, it's
Dude.
obviously really awkward because you have these different creature types, and if you play it on Elemental, that's awkward. If you play it on Human for Superior Spider-Man, then it's awkward for the Demon. But this deck's big struggle, I think, in the format has been that you're trying to resolve big, expensive creatures without Cavern of Souls, so it makes sense to include it. You just probably have to pick your battle there and say my mana is going to be worse, but at least, sometimes I'm just going to resolve the Demon on turn 6 with a Cavern of Souls, and my opponent's entire plan of countering it is at least not going to work anymore.
Yeah, and then I mean, even having just 2 Cavern of Souls should make your control matchup a lot better too, I would think, because you could eventually dig for it and just hold it until you're ready to cast the demon.
Yep.
Pretty huge. Okay. So, good job to Lee here. What other decks do we have that are interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I already kind of went over my team's landfall list, but in 9th place on the Boulder, Andy Garcia Romo with our landfall list. So unfortunately, missed out on breakers on top 8. Andy also, 2 PTs in a row, has been the best performer on the Boulder in top 16 in the last Pro Tour as well with Spelementals. So yeah, pretty kind of all 4 ofs with 2 Sapling Nursery. I actually kept kind of bothering my team about Sapling Nursery a lot this landfall because the lists got to 0 kind of after that last RC that won with 0. And the whole time I was kind of just like, you're just going to play some matchups where this card single-handedly wins the game, and you're a mono green deck. Like, how much better can your cards in the 75 really be? Like, please at least sideboard some copies of this card. And then, I think with Prowess really not having any elusive otters, they kind of determined that if they don't have elusive otter and you just like get a nursery down and you aren't immediately dead to a crab or something, you basically can never lose.
So you might as well main deck it. Or
Yeah.
do they get bad in multiples or something? Is that the fear of playing a lot of them?
Just because they're expensive, right? I mean, this deck already has Esper Origins Flashback, Ice Tail Explorer, and Mightform Harmonizer. So I think if you count all of those and Nursery as expensive cards, then this deck's kind of capped at how many expensive cards you could really play. Those are all basically cards that don't work in the first 3 turns of the game.
Right.
Or
it's like it's like 12 4-drops already, and then you're adding some nurseries. Okay.
Yeah, the nursery, one nice aspect about it is it has, a clunky stage of the game in the turns like 3 to 5, maybe turn 3 to 4 area where it's not really something you can deploy, but after you get through that stage of the game, it's really good against counter spells, I think, because you can double spell with it pretty easily because it costs 2.
Okay. And then Let's see.
And
So
our
take this.
plan, we had a bunch of Surex in the sideboard. I just wanted to point out, people really loading up on Flash Freeze this tournament and Get Out and stuff like that. So I like, if they're loading up on Flash Freeze, they use Serac to kind of hedge against that. It's the same kind of thing I mentioned with Esper Origins against Get Out, where it's just like, just having something you can stick and resolve when your opponent's passing with counter magic and basically only counter magic is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, Surik is a hell of a card, and it's really a haymaker against decks that are trying to, control you. One of the big reasons probably why you do so well against them, to be honest. I mean, there's other reasons, but that certainly helps.
Yeah. Yeah, we saw Handshake actually just had a Cavern of Souls main and sideboard, which is, kind of declaring a similar thing, though you need it to line up properly. But your payoff's a lot better, right? When your opponent's passing with Flash Freeze or Get Out and you just still resolve Ice Tail Explorer, it's probably really devastating for them.
Yeah. Good
They said they mostly just
Cavern
named
of Souls.
Insect. I guess notably, the Harmonizer and Ice Tail are both insects, so two of their big payoffs are the same creature type. So that's pretty nice. I could see maybe my team missing that. Not that I pointed it out or anything, but that sounds like a pretty nice, at least one or two of to have access to in this list.
Yeah. If you have a hand with Cavern and Llanowar Elf and you have to play it, you could say Druid, and then your Might Form Harmonizer is also a Druid.
Still uncounterable. Yeah. No, it's pretty nice. No double up on Bird, but that's okay. It's a big deal too, because I think, we see the promising vein here, but when you're just like looking for reliable untapped lands for this deck too, and you already have 14 basic forests, you kind of are like, I really don't want to add the 15th basic forest. So finding something a little different is kind of nice.
Right. So to find the best performing Is It Prowess deck, you actually had to go outside the top 8, which is interesting because people thought it was going to be the best deck by far. And, it did okay. But so what have we got here? We've got Namdang
Yep.
in 15th.
Team TCG player, I believe. So, team I teamed with. That's Channel Fireball for those not up to speed, but I think they're officially now completely just Team TCG player. Also, shout out to Nam giving me some notes in playing my mono green historic deck last month. But
cool.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of really close to what looked like a pretty good, like, normal prowess list to me, if that makes sense. Obviously without Elusive Otter, but I like the, 4 talent, 4 crab, 4 show off, 4 flow state, 2 stock up. Like, I kind of like this whole list. I think it's pretty well built. Everything makes a lot of sense to me. I heard there was a Sunderflock post-board plan with 2 Sunderflocks. I was told by this team they did really well against Landfall in testing and at the Pro Tour with this sideboard plan of Sunderflock, but notably they boarded out all their Storm Chasers talents. So maybe kind of a juke that wasn't as expected. I guess notably, if you only ever like plot the show-offs, you could kind of completely brick their Melt Shredder's resolves, which they might be leaving in because they're kind of scared of the Otter tokens of the show-offs too. And the Otter tokens also aren't good with Sunderflock. Also, like, boarding out something that's not an instant or sorcery makes a lot of sense when you're like relying more heavily on getting a crab down, especially a crab down maybe through a Soul Guide Lantern, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the first things I do when at least nowadays, when a Pro Tour starts and I'm looking through decks, is I'll look at like what Reed Duke and gang played and saw this. It just seemed like a really streamlined deck. The biggest new card here obviously being Flow State, and I think it plays extremely well in this deck. I wasn't sure that it was going to replace Stock Up. We both thought it'd be pretty good, and we both put it on our top 10 cards. But after playing with it or playing against this deck, it is a really effective card in this deck. Just being 2 mana as opposed to the Stock Ups 3 is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little silly to say, I guess, but if you tasked me with building a blue-red prowess deck that was not allowed to play Elusive Otter, I really feel like my main deck would have been at least 59 of these cards.
Wow.
It's almost like identical with how I would build decks. Like, I would play like the 1 Pierce, 2 Get Out, 1 Roaring Furnace, 1 Joke. I think it would just be like, would I play a second Stock Up or like something else?
Right.
That's like the only I think I almost sent you a list that, was how I was going to shell it out for last week's episode, and I think it might have literally been exactly this with just like 1 card off.
Okay. Well, speaking of the otter, someone did perform well. Shota Yosoka,
Yeah.
Hall of Famer, and it looks like they've got prowess. They have 4 elusive otters. They also have colors from Stallion, so more threats overall here.
Yeah, the real difference here is no Eddie Merc crab.
Oh, right.
That's
Interesting.
yeah. So just kind of a full on prowess deck because the Opus ability on Stallions
Yeah,
much more of a
he's like,
prowessy
this
type
doesn't
thing.
have prowess. Why am I?
Yeah.
I'm gonna put this in my prowess deck.
Yeah, and still 4 flow state, 1 stock up, no wild ride, but not a big deal.
Got a magic
Has
damper.
Yep, just kicked burst lightning if you want to copy the Stallion, but also to some extent that's fine. Oh, that's not true actually. We see there are sorry, I can't count how many. Is that 2 multiversal passage? So there are 3 green sources in this deck between the Great Hall and the multiversal passages, and you can play Grove's Bounty to trigger the Stallion as well every now and then.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
I mean, the Stallion just being, a 3/3 haste with Ward 1, it's just a super good card anyways.
Yeah, no, versus all these burst lightnings and even it's hard to tap with Eddie Merc crap as well. I know it's kind of a big deal in these blue-red mirrors to have, so that's kind of nice, and maybe ultimately it's kind of similar to having crab anyways, but you don't give up as much speed because you just kind of have, these 14 threats, which I think is a pretty normal prowess number of threats to play, weirdly enough. It's kind of like a number you'll see a lot when you look at prowessy type decks in Magic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is like kind of the 14 most aggressive ones you could possibly play, so that's kind of cohesive to me.
I wonder how he got to no crabs. I know a lot of players were actually pretty happy with the crab. Even putting it in decks or trying it in decks where it didn't even really belong, like lessons and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. And maybe people over-indexed graveyard hate against him too much when he had the crab. I would say this is an example of a prowess list where like your opponent could play a Soul Guide Lantern against you and you might kind of shrug it off and laugh.
Oh, yeah. You wouldn't hardly care at all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's just stopping flow state and level 2 of talent. And if you are maintaining a really aggressive lean build like this, then your opponent's spending mana and cards on something like Rest in Peace or Soul Guide Lantern is probably kind of a joke.
Yeah. I will say that like when I see the otter on one hand, I would think that this would be a better direction against landfall going forward, but I'm not sure the Stallion seems like the crab might be a lot better than the Stallion there.
Yeah. We could also scroll down and see the matchups here. So let's see. He went 0-2 against landfall in the event.
Yeah, so that might speak to that.
And then looks like overall just 6-4, and then a 5-1 draft finish. So
yeah, when you're looking at PT results, you have to be a little careful. You have to look at the player and you have to find out what their draft record was for an event, because since it's a split tournament, sometimes they're carrying their constructed deck with a really good record, or sometimes vice versa, where they don't really show up high in the standings, so you kind of miss it, but you can see that they did like 8-2 or 7-3 or something really good and constructed, and they were held down by a 1-5 or a 2-4.
Yeah, and it all is it's all tough at the PT too, just that you'll be at a really, maybe a not spectacular record like 6-6 or something, and you can still play against one of the best players in the world.
Oh yeah, or even a losing record.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel this way, and I think most players would agree. Like at PT Aether Drift, I went 6-4 in standard and 4-2 in draft, and I was really satisfied. Like I won more than I lost in both formats. That's great.
Yeah. Overall, if you play a Pro Tour and even if you have a losing record, there's really nothing shameful about that.
Yeah.
The field is literally as tough as it gets. So,
but yeah, it's just seems like the deck was fine, but obviously 0-2 against landfall is a little scary, even with a build that I kind of stated might be one that's favored against landfall. But also all these landfall players nowadays, they're all main decking Melch Traders, Resolves, or Roads in general. I think a lot of the data from Prowess versus landfall a while ago, the landfall list just would not have any main deck Melch Traders, Resolves, sometimes no removal at all, stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's a lot different. Yeah. This list maybe makes me think that he was really focused on mirror matches and maybe not so much green, but
yeah, or just generally, I think kind of philosophically, like I'm a fan of being aggressive and making sure you just have a pretty proactive game plan because you don't always know what you're going to play against.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, moving on to some lesser performing decks, lesser quantity decks. We've got Simic Omniscience by Li Shitan.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of point out that this is a deck that, can win matches. This list moved away. It seemed like people were doing the kind of the red splash for actual red spells besides the Northwind Avatar. I think Lee is pretty good typically at building decks like this. So stayed with kind of more consistent and nice mana. Not really a ton of sources for the Northwind Avatar. It's more of a win con post Omniscience, but you have the sources in Cavern and Multiversal Passage if you need it. And yeah, just using Bounce Off as a way to, defend itself, but also post Omniscience. If you use the Formidable Speaker, maybe you can use a Bounce Off to, use Formidable Speaker to get your Kona, but then maybe the Bounce Off lets you get Meringue River Regent or I guess Northwing Avatar and go to the races there. I feel like the sideboard, like 4th Regent, 1 Omni Changeling, and 1 Terror of the Peaks, is actually too much stuff to win the game. I've seen some alternate things, but I just don't think you need to dedicate 3 sideboard slots. It's not a big deal because you're probably not sideboarding much with this deck anyways, but there's some creative things you can do that certainly need less sideboard slots than this to close the game.
Like maybe no Terror of the Peaks. Because obviously the Changeling and the Regent is for when you have Omniscience and Avatar and you want to like loop, right?
Yeah, and I don't understand I guess the River Regent and the Omni Changeling, it's this weird corner case where your opponent has a lot of removal, I guess. And you can like beat removal by having multiples of these cards in your sideboard. It's very weird. It's some things I've mapped out before. I will say, let me explain kind of a more basic loop here, I guess. If you get the Kona into play and tap it, and then you put in Omniscience, if you have just Formidable Speaker and 1 card in your hand, I think you can win. Without having a River Regent in your sideboard, because you like play the Speaker, discard your last card, get the River Regent, play it, bounce the Speaker and the Kona, then you play the Speaker, discard the Kona, get a second River Regent. You play that Regent, you bounce Speaker and Regent, then you cast Coil and Catch, which will put you up to the Speaker plus 2 cards in your hand. You'll play the Speaker, get the River Regents again, bounce River Regent and Speaker, and you keep going up cards this way.
Mm-hmm. So
you actually can use the Coil and Catch part to eventually go up cards, which means you'll find the Northwind Avatar and do your loops, which is why, to me, the Omni Changeling plus River Regent plus Terror's like a generic win con card. Like, you could win with counter spells, but I understand when you're playing, if you played a mirror match, you kind of actually need a way to kill your opponent, because what if they kill you with Cavern of Souls on their turn? But Extinguish Your Battleship is a card I've seen, you can destroy all your opponent's lands and put all your dragons into play, and that'll work. Stuff like that.
Okay, but say you have Kona Omniscience, but you don't have Speaker, but you only have the Avatar. Don't you need the River Regent in your sideboard?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The Omni Changeling, I guess, is the one that's a little weird to me.
Okay. Because then in that situation, you get Regent.
Regent, maybe you're right. Maybe you just need all this to win from just that spot. I guess you do.
And then play Avatar.
Then I guess you would need Omni Changeling to copy the Regent and then bounce both. Okay, fair enough.
Right. Okay.
I like to see the voice victories here. It's a little silly. You might notice a lack of white sources. The matchups you want voice are just really counterspell heavy matchups, and I literally think the only white source you care about having for it is Cavern of Souls anyways. 3's a lot of copies for that. I kind of think, I really only care about seeing the first one to get with Formidable Speaker, but I'm glad to see it here.
Consult seems like a good sideboard card for that sort of matchup. Just digging for Cavern.
That makes sense too. Consult used to be a main deck card here. It seems like people have replaced it with Winter Night Stories. Winter Night's kind of cool because it counts as a tapper for Kona.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, overall, Northwind Avatar is pretty sweet here. I don't know how consistent this deck is, but boy, it can be powerful. Li Shitan was in a feature match with Reed Duke, and he beat him on turn 4.
Just twice. Yeah.
Twice in a row. It was really brutal.
Yeah.
Cavernous Souls being a big part of that. But yeah,
Yeah, it's a deck still. I'm curious. We could see his matchups here too. I'm curious how he did against Landfall because it looks like a deck where you're like, oh, this beats up on Landfall because it's a combo deck, but then
it's just not that
he
close.
played against Landfall 0 times. So
Who
it
knows?
was only a quarter of the tournament. As much as it dominated the tournament, it's actually not that crazy for someone to dodge it.
Right. In 10 rounds, it's
Yeah.
not that crazy at all. At 10 rounds, right, you only see it 2.5. I mean, I guess if it's
Yeah.
in the winner's circle, you see it slightly more, but that could be fudged with variance.
Yeah, and also just a 6-4 record in the end.
Yeah. But cool deck. Just maybe a little consistent. And okay, here's another big deck that did not perform well, right? But
yeah, this is my team's Azorius Momo list, so I just
Okay.
wanted to point it out because I kind of had mentioned some things.
let's have a look here.
I like that they have 22 lands. The Flood Pits Drowners is like kind of a pick up, a thing you could pick up with Pixie or Flicker with Daydream that apparently was some needed interaction against Landfall. They were pretty worried about the Landfall matchup. I think Andrew actually beat Landfall more than he lost to it, and as compared to other decks in the format, and maybe they overestimated their Izzet matchups, which was kind of the selling point of this deck. I think to them was they was going to have great Izzet matchups.
Right. Real quick, this is basically just the mono white Momo deck, but because they've gotten Daydream from the new set, which is the 1 white sorcery where you blink a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on, and then it has flashback for 3. They've added Quantum Riddler because it's actually pretty possible to go turn 1 Momo, turn 2 Riddler. Daydream is like a big feature of this deck, whereas before the blink effects in standard would cost blue.
Yeah, you can do that with Springleaf Drum as well. So you have a lot of outs to turn to Flicker Riddler or Flicker's Shepherd.
Oh, gotcha. You don't even need Momo. Yeah, turn 1 Drum or turn 1 Momo. Yeah, that's pretty nice.
Yeah.
Couple Flood Pits Drowners here. Just, I guess, to have some interaction that's also still a creature.
Yeah, and the creature count matters for, your beatdown deck and you have Springleaf Drum, stuff like that, compared to like just playing 4 Get Lost. The old mono white Momo lists had just 4 Seamer, 4 Get Lost as interaction, but you have to keep in mind that this list is fit in 4 Daydream, so their like creature count is still actually down a little from the older lists.
Only 1 Cosmogran Zenith. That was a bigger part of the mono white deck.
Yeah, I didn't even like it that much in the old mono white decks, and I think a big part of it was kind of this big kind of toughness, big powerful thing, and I think Daydream kind of does that.
Okay.
So honestly, I mean, my build of this deck I think has like an Angswift Savior over the Cosmogrants and is roughly the same otherwise, but
I guess my thought was Daydream's kind of good with Cosmogran, but I mean, if you don't need it, I guess
the Cosmogrants also like not good with Sage of the Skies. They have mismatch incentives, I guess, on how you sequence your turns a lot of the time.
Yeah, and Sage of the Skies is sort of funny enough. It's kind of the key card of this deck in a lot of ways, where it's sort of the card that makes it so good, at least in theory, against prowess.
Yeah. I guess another thing with Cosmogrand is when Momo gets involved, the Cosmogrand is your most expensive card in your deck by a whole mana. So it's kind of a weird outlier there too. And you do have Momo a lot because of the Shepherd. Usually you'll tutor Momo with the Shepherd pretty often because it's so powerful in your deck. And a big strength of the card Momo is even after turn 1, you can play it in a flyer in the same turn and it basically costs 0 mana.
Right. And then there's like Hylia, which isn't flying, but it has the warp for 1, which that card, by the way, is super good in this deck too.
Yeah, and you can even Daydream Hylia sometimes.
It's pretty nice. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I like this deck, even though it didn't perform well. I think maybe this is certainly a deck to keep your eye on if the format switches around a bit. This tournament, for at least like Andrew Ellenbogen and the people who chose to play this didn't really pan out the way they wanted it to, I imagine. But
yeah, and it's so weird because this list has 22 lands, and me is just kind of a common mana base builder. I remember they asked about it, and I was just like, this is exactly how I build the mana base. 12 duels, 2 extra starting towns, fill it out with planes and a couple abandoned air temple. But all the other Momo lists I saw had 20 or 21 lands.
Okay.
Which was kind of weird to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember Andrew had pointed out he started 3-0 in the tournament against Landfall, which is the matchup he was kind of scared to play against, but then in the end went 6-4, so he went 3-4 against non-Landfall decks, which is kind of not what he expected to have happen in this tournament.
Yeah. Okay. Only went 1-2 in the first draft, I see. Okay. All right. I think those are all the lists you sent me. Huh?
Yep.
There's
Yeah.
a couple I found that were interesting we could talk about real quick.
Yeah, of course.
So Shuhei Nakamura played this Sultai control deck.
Oh, cool. I never saw this. Funny.
Let me remind myself of his constructed record here. Looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
7-3.
7-3. Yep.
Yeah, that's
So
pretty cool.
yeah, pretty nice.
So it's like it's a superior Spider-Man Sultai deck, but not all in on the bringer.
Right, and not like the demon version, but instead just sort of
and
this,
has
like,
the
mid-range.
cornucopia plus withering cure, or is it curse
Curse
combo? Curse, yeah, that's pretty cool.
as the sweeper. 4 cornucopias is a lot, but in 25 land. But I mean, I guess it works pretty nicely in this deck.
Yeah, this deck can use its mana pretty well, and we even see the Emeritus here.
Mm-hmm.
Something I don't think anybody registered, but a cool card with the Emeritus, if you're trying to brew with it, is Bender's Water Skin from Avatar.
So cool.
It's just a Manolith, one of the many Manolith variants they always put in limited formats, but this one untaps on each player's turn. So you can play the Emeritus one turn ahead of schedule and then cast Ancestral Recall on your opponent's upkeep. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so nice. I think I'm going to do a video on a deck like that. I just haven't quite finished brewing it, but that's going to be fun. So look forward to that.
But yeah, anyways, this deck, I mean, yeah, just kind of a Sultai value pile with a mix of sweepers and Rakshas's Bargain. I like the Black Cat, which is a double Gonti, kind of a silly card.
Yeah.
And yeah, the Emeritus
Spider-Man.
is good with Spider-Man. If, I think you need, the random discard things, but we see Wistfulness, Awaken the Honored Dead, Rakshas's Bargain, when you just end up incidentally getting into your graveyard, discounting that card by a mana is a big deal.
Yeah, and it's totally worth the -1/-1, essentially.
Yeah.
Is pretty much the only downfall. It still gets the flying and the ward and all that. I will say I played a good amount with some green-black decks, and Withering Curse actually impressed me. It's pretty nice. The infest mode in this format is actually pretty strong, and then being able to turn it on to a full sweeper later in the game and still have it only be 3 mana, so you can like sweep the board and still play something else.
Yeah,
can be really strong.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine this deck is not going to be great into landfall, but it's certainly better into landfall than like a pure control deck is. You have a lot of proactive things going on, and the issue fundamentally with a control deck against landfall is like some games they like play a bunch of cards you really need the Reckoning Hex, and if sometimes you'll have like the 2 Reckoning Hexes for their 2 Chocobos, and that's like how the game starts, and then maybe you deceit their cards and Spider-Man deceit them, and it kind of works out. But some games they kill you with Earthbender Ascension and Bossing Say and stuff like that, and your Reckoning Hexes are like really useless even if they're killing Earthbent lands and stuff like that. And it's kind of just like a really simple example in my mind is it's like they they don't have a lot of control over if they're a really aggressive start or a really grindy game. But imagine if you sat down and your opponent's like, I'm going to flip a coin, and if I flip a heads, you need to flip a heads, and if I flip tails, you need to flip a tails. It's kind of how I feel it works a lot of times when you play like a purely proactive deck against a very reactive deck. Mm-hmm. And when you play that game with just heads and tails, they're kind of ahead. I mean, they're just ahead like mathematically on that,
Yeah. The Demons deck, the player that went 9-1, they did okay against landfall, right? They had trouble against prowess.
Yeah. I mean, they went 9-1, so they did probably pretty good against everything.
That's fair.
Yeah.
My point is, like, maybe if there is a deck that is good against them, it is this, like, I'm going to play a big fat creature and kind of cheat into play and then also kill some of your stuff. More so than, like, a Jeskai control deck, which has some more obvious problems against them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Just the cool deck. And Shuhei Nakamura is a really veteran player.
Yeah, also, I'm sure he played really well. No Death Mark in the sideboard. That's a secret standard card as well from Foundations. I wonder if maybe people will consider it a little
He had
more.
Pest Control. That one's pretty interesting.
Oh, wow.
Against specifically Prowess, because it gets talent and all that.
Yeah, and I guess you have the Cornucopia to help with the white count. It's still kind of low.
Looks like he's got 9 total.
Yeah, but naming white on the passage is tough. But, it does cycling too, so maybe you just cycle it if you can't cast it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's the plan. Interesting card. Yeah. What were you going to say when I cut you off?
Oh, sorry, I don't remember.
Oh, it's okay.
Looks like I see Tristan defeated him as a landfall player, and so did Art. So 2 handshake landfall players did beat him.
Yeah. I will say he only went looks like 2-4 unlimited, and he's kind of known for being a really great limited player. So
Yeah, I mean, on a separate thing about just the PT being hard, it's also that 6 rounds is not a huge sample, and
No.
you'll see this all the time. That it's really not weird for a great player to have a poor weekend in limited or whatever,
yeah.
because 1-2ing 2 drafts is not that weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but he did do well in constructed. So
yeah,
nice job. And then one other deck. This was played by a team. I don't know the team because I
sent this deck too. Yeah.
But this is like a Jeskai control deck, but instead of being built around loot or nothing at all, it's built around Tablet of Discovery. So I thought you might like this deck.
So to be clear, I'm not involved with this team, but I literally sent a deck that looks like this to my team just on paper. Like
funny.
Just purely splashing Jeskai Revelation only, maximizing the tablet. I had Firebender Lesson instead of the Thunder Magic because I wanted to kill like Crab. But obviously in the world of Landfall, if you recognize you need to kill the 4 toughness creatures more. I even looked at all the counter spells and I did not suggest Swallowed by Leviathans, but I think it was mentioned as like a card that lines up well with the tablet on turn 4.
Yeah. It can be like kind of a hard counter late in the game still. That's versatile for non-creatures or creatures.
Yeah, I sent it to my team and it was basically like, well, the only issue is I have no idea what interaction should play because I'm not that invested in this. But like this pile of cards where you just play Jeskai Revelation and cast Flashback Jeskai Revelation seems pretty good. It seems like it does something powerful enough with like my understanding of Standard, and kind of cool to see it doing well.
Yeah, it's funny because in a lot of different cards, but the concept of this deck, I built a deck really similar to it, but using loot instead of tablet, and it being a little different. But it's a pretty strong deck. I mean, it's got some problems. One of them is it's hard to play all the right interaction, basically, which is just the controls issue in this format in general.
I'd mentioned I'd played it with just like all the lessons cards too.
How'd that go?
Instead, I mean, that I think I mentioned last week. It plays pretty similar to I imagine how this deck plays, but you just need your removal to be really good. I see this deck. I think the key thing that's maybe different from it and decks I was building is it has 4 stock up, 4 consult, and I think I just did not have 4 consult and would have just like even more interaction. So clearly, that in a sense that's a little bit more proactive because it's just making sure it draws its good cards more that matter.
Right.
And also I think the really exciting thing to do with this deck is just like play Jeskai Revelation twice between drawing 2 copies or flashback on it, kind of accelerated. And that's a really powerful thing that you could imagine stealing a game from landfall or stuff like that, or not even stealing, but just overpowering them. So having more digging tools makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I'm not a huge fan of Jeskai Control before this new set released, but I think it's gotten a ton of new tools. Like I mean, actually, it's not clear to me that tablet or loot is better. But
I guess go ahead.
Either way, I think the idea of like you're gonna ramp and sort of overpower with this revelation plan is a pretty good direction for this deck to go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll say I think the tablet's a much more powerful card than the loot.
Okay.
It's just, I mean, it's a whole mana cheaper. You can get a card out of it right away. You build your deck like this. Obviously, the counter magic is misses, but like when you cast it on turn 4 and you have a land drop in your hand, you actually will like hit something a lot of the time.
Yeah. I still haven't played with it. I've only played with the loot, so maybe if I played with the tablet, I would come to the same conclusion. So I'll make sure to do that, and we'll see how it goes.
The hamlets are, an interesting thing. This mana base is a little bit different than I think I would build it, and I could see building it and figuring out how to fit in the hamlet.
I mean, if you can fit just 1 or 2 hamlets, I think they're actually pretty crucial against Bossing Say, or even against like you've got a deck with Fountain Port, that sort of thing. It's sort of a way to like play Demolition Field, but you only have to play 1 or 2. It might just be better than Demolition Field than Standard.
Yeah,
so
I can see it. It definitely is a big deal against Bossing Say for decks like this.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's all I got. In terms of standard going forward. I mean, just this month we've got 2 RCs coming up. I don't think either of them are going to them, but do you envision, where the format might go? Do you have any early predictions or
Yeah.
where you might start?
So my advice to listeners, I would not be scared to play Landfall. I think, you can probably have to figure out your own conclusions about playing Selesnya or Mono Green, but I think it's just always going to be a solid deck. I think it's really hard to attack. I think it's really hard for the meta to kind of shape to attacking it too dramatically because the Cub decks are still going to struggle against, I think, these Izzet decks sometimes. A deck I weirdly would not recommend, I think, is Matt Nass's deck, because I think what I would do if you wanted to play a fast Cub deck is just lean into the full-on fast Cub deck with the main deck Spider Manifestations and Nature's Rhythms. And I think what you'll gain by doing that is you'll not only be actually like extremely favored against Landfall rather than just maybe a little favored. I think you'll also be really favored against the people meeting the halfway point, which is Matt Nass's deck.
Okay. Makes sense. Darren. It's unfortunate you say that. I think Matt Nass's deck is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, if
Green
Izzet's on a
light
big
beat that
decline,
down.
like, I don't know, the Key Knight Curator and Sage of the Skies are just both not very good in the Landfall. It seems a little weird to be main decking those if the big thing that might happen is it will kind of decline.
I heard people talking about like a ban announcement coming up soon. Is that true?
The kind of traditional thing is around this time because the next Pro Tour is modern and there's not any big standard events for a while. I doubt this will happen after the RC, to be clear. I think probably like June is.
Okay.
I think they will ban some cards. Yeah.
Well, I'm not even so much asking is like if they'll ban something, but like is that something people have to worry about before the RC?
No, I don't think before the RC. I think maybe right after.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good.
I guess
at least.
on that note, I think banning Bad Rimmel Cub would be a horrible idea. I think it would,
Oh yeah.
the Landfall deck would be worse as a deck because I do think it's correct for them to play Cub. I'm not saying they're like all wrong by playing Cub, but the fact that the other Cub decks wouldn't exist to prey on them would be a huge benefit to them.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if they're going to ban something, they would probably have to go through like a whole sleuth of things. I would think they're probably going to let things play out, but maybe it'll be like, I guess if both RCs are just like prowess versus landfall dual decks all the way through the top standings, they might do something.
I mean, so the other thing when they do those bans is they're thinking about cards that maybe should have rotated already if the rotation wasn't added by a year. So I really think they might look at Storm Chaser's talent.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's kind
The
of
Landfall deck does not have that many old cards in it, though. So that's kind of tough.
Just conceptually, Storm Chaser's talent is like kind of a crazy card with how much it does and the fact that they knew Boomerang Basics was coming and they didn't ban it. It's a little wild. Landfall's interesting to me because I very clearly can tell how strong of a deck it is, especially when I play against it. But just looking at it, it's like, why is this deck so hard to build a deck that's like a removal deck to beat it? It's just green creatures and stuff. I guess it's just so efficient that
the Bossing Say card is really tough. That's definitely a big ask. I mean, you have to play a waste. Now they've given you wastes.
You can play a waste to beat it, though.
But
that's not so bad, right?
It's a little harder. It's a little easier for you, but it's still like a tall order.
Mm-hmm. Like, there's some good green-black cards from the new set. I wonder if you could build like a green-black deck with some Petrified Hamlets in it and go over the top of them, use a lot of removal.
Yeah, I'll say my team did that and it looked pretty poor, but they made some changes. They had a deck at one point that had both the demon and the Hamlet in it. That combination did help kind of defeat them.
Right. Well, maybe, but I think the problem with that is like the Izzet decks. So maybe if the Izzet decks were turned down a notch, something like that would be plausible, is kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, what are you supposed to ban in mono green? Like, I don't think Cub would do it.
The Chocobo or the Harmonizer or something.
I mean, that sounds ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, they could ban Chocobo and be like, we're printing too many good 1-mana cards. We got to slow the format down, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing with Standard in general when you're looking at decks is just like a lot of the strong decks play a ton of 1-drops.
Yeah, and there's only
I don't think that's weird. Yeah.
In the format. Yeah. It wouldn't be crazy just to reduce the amount of 1-drops. They have a lot of 1-drops on the ban list already, too. Thank you for listening to the Stock Up Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, you can support us over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. That is the best way to support us. At the moment, it's $1 a month, and you get access to all of our exclusive content that we post over there.
as well as access to our Stock Up podcast Discord, which is growing, and I think we have a lot of fun conversations over there. So go check that out. Of course, you could also follow us on YouTube. Please like and subscribe while you're there. And Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that jazz. You can listen to us there, anywhere. And we want to thank our patrons that have been with us from the start, a lot of you, and whoever has joined recently. We really do appreciate it. It means a lot. So please enjoy the rest of the episode. Stick around to the end, okay? And we'll talk to you later.
So, okay. Well, that'll do it for this one, folks. Thanks for listening. Let us know if you have any questions. Let's talk to us in Discord, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. So I've been playing a lot of Pokemon Champions recently, which I think I've mentioned before, but it's a pretty accessible, like, new way to get into Pokemon VGC, which is not something I've really ever done before.
Is it something you've kind of wanted to do?
Yeah, I've been paying attention to it a little bit over the last year or so, probably, and felt like the idea of training and building a team was kind of a big jump, and this game kind of fixes that. So that's pretty cool. And I know pretty soon you'll be able to play it on your phone, which is awesome. But it's interesting looking at like a different player base of people, because I think especially the player base I interact with Magic a lot are pretty, what would be the phrase? They're just, they understand how losing works and how, being competitive works. And I think a lot of people that come into a game like Pokemon, especially with such a wide audience, are they'll have like an anti-competitiveness to them, even though ultimately it's like a ranked ladder game. The whole game's basically just a ranked ladder. That's all the game is. And it's very similar to like Arena, even, you just have little tiers you climb up, and then eventually you hit something called Master Ball that's basically mythic. And, it's like I've hit Master Ball, but I don't think I'm very good at the game. And, I don't mind people being proud of hitting that. That doesn't really bother me. But just like people get upset that they face against the same teams all the time. They get upset that, certain moves are cheesing them or whatever. And, I found some content creators that, I can tell are very good. Notably, one of the most prolific content creators, his name is Wolf. He's also just like the most accomplished player in the game ever. So it's kind of interesting to have like the best player in their game by far also be one of the more popular content creators. That's kind of helpful. But even with that, yeah, it's just interesting because, almost every game I lose of this game, I just feel like it's very obviously my fault. Like I'm just playing bad.
Yeah.
And it seems like people really just have this mentality that there's like luck or things, or just that they care that certain things are OP. And it's like, especially in this game, things don't really get nerfed. They do over time, but there's not like patches in the game. Like this game, one of the more popular Pokemon, Incineroar, did get nerfed. He lost one of those moves that he was able to learn. But that's how things get buffed or nerfed in Pokemon, is a new game has to come out.
Right. Okay.
So they're not gonna like patch things.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. First, really quick, you said the content creator is also like the world's best player or whatever. Does he have to, is that like the only way he can really monetize, or do their tournaments have payouts?
Their tournaments, I think, have pretty good payouts. It's probably not the same as like Pro Tours and stuff, but there's probably like a lot of free to enter type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And to be clear, like this player has won Worlds and won like 10 regionals, like stuff like that. It's pretty. In one of his videos, he talked about how people always like accuse him of not being very humble or whatever. But I kind of agree with him. It's just like, you got to talk about your accomplishments, and he's just so accomplished that it's hard to like not sound like a huge braggart. But he also, I don't think, is being like a huge braggart comparatively. I have a cool little story about him too. Is like, I guess his first tournament ever when he was a teenager. He'd been playing the game a while or whatever, and kind of really focusing on the competitive aspect of it for this tournament. And his dad drove him there and was like kind of giving him a talk about like, you're probably going to lose in this tournament, and that's okay, and stuff like that. And he won
Good
the whole
advice.
thing. He's won his whole tournament, his first tournament ever as a teenager. So like, that's how good he is.
Destroyed his life.
Yeah.
Now he has
like,
to,
yeah.
Now he's just never going to do anything ever again. But do this? No, just kidding.
Yeah.
But it certainly probably set him on that track. Yeah, when he's a kid. But he's really good at it. It's funny.
Yeah.
The other thought I had when you're telling me all this is, yeah, certainly one of the things that is like a maturing curve of playing TCGs, or probably competitive games in general, but especially ones with a lot of variance involved, is just being mature around losing and all that sort of thing. Like even pretty veteran players, and we do it sometimes, we complain
Yeah,
at various points, but it's
player base
never
is
really
also
like.
probably much younger and literally children most of the time. So give
Yeah,
them
that's
some
fair.
slack there.
That's fair. It's not. I mean, the video game scene though has been around for a while, right? Competitive video game scene. I would think.
Yeah,
some
definitely.
of that
But
stuff.
they always get, I think they probably get a way bigger influx of new players than something like Magic does.
Oh, of course. Pokemon being like the biggest media franchise in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this game in particular is, it's going to be a huge change to, I think, how many people play. And, I've seen similar things with Arena, to be fair. I just don't really interact with those spaces. I kind of remember, I don't even know how to find it, but it was like a forum page for Arena for bug reporting.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just littered with people being like, I drew 7 lands in a row. That's a bug. I had to mulligan 4 times. That's a bug.
A video
You know-
came across my feed once. It was a YouTube video with like several thousand views, at least. And the premise of it was basically that they had proof that Arena is rigged.
Yeah.
And their proof was just like a long string of anecdotal stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, man. But yeah, it's definitely, people learn and they learn to accept defeat, and hopefully anyways, or they quit. Those are pretty
Yeah.
much the options. All right.